like to give you a few tips on how to keep color in your flower garden all summer long. A lot of annuals come and go through the season, but if you shift them in and out of the garden, you can keep some bright color. Now obviously petunias down here will be with you all summer if you do a few things to keep them blooming. One is to keep them fertilized, especially if they're growing in containers. You can tell petunias are running out of gas, especially in terms of nitrogen fertilizer, if the leaves get smaller or pale or if they quit blooming. You can rejuvenate them by adding some soluble complete fertilizer, such as a water-soluble 20-20-20. That'll really give them a good shot and get them back into blooming again. Now, if petunias are growing in a place where you don't want them to be long and cascading, you can pinch them back and keep them in shape through the summertime. Now, another mainline summer annual that a lot of us grow are geraniums. We have some growing in containers here. They're just starting to come into bloom, and in order to keep them blooming profusely, after each blossom or cluster of blossoms finishes, we'll go in and snip those out to keep them blooming. Again, geraniums like to have plenty of food, especially if they're grown in a container. By all means, make sure your geraniums get plenty of water in a container. In fact, it might be a good tip to slip this down inside a larger container and line that with moist peat moss, and that will keep them from wilting down too much in the heat. Now, Wysteria is a flowering perennial, and its bloom has already come and gone, but it does need attention in the summertime. This is a white flowering wisteria that we just planted this spring, and it's winding its way up the pole. We're keeping it tied up with some foam ties and training it up to the top of our arbor, and eventually it will be trained across both wings of this arbor. Should give us some shade and some nice pretty flowers every spring. Now, on the back side of our trellis here, our gardeners, Terrell and Dennis, planted some lantana, which is very, very heat tolerant. And around it they put landscape fabric, mulch on top, and some landscaping timbers, and it has really improved the appearance of this small arbor area right here. Well, there's another use for lantana in our raised bed garden over here. In our little raised bed flower garden here in front, you remember we planted some Japanese holly to the back. And this spring we had some beautiful Dutch bulbs, and we also had some pansies. Well, the pansies are starting to pass their prime, and they really need to come out of here. They're getting stretched out, the flowers are fading a bit. We can take some of those and press them and dry them if we want to preserve them, but for the most part the plants really do need to come out of here. To replace them with something very heat tolerant, we're going to use lantana. Lantana is a woody perennial that grows along the beaches along the Gulf Coast. It's not hardy up here. There are some hardy strains, but this particular one is not. Cuttings were taken this spring. They were rooted in a greenhouse, and now we'll be planting those out in the flower bed here. Lantana loves the heat. It gives you a vibrant yellow color all summer long. Also, there are some forms that come in shades of pink and orange, very pastel pink and orange. But if you want something in the yellow range that's very insect tolerant and heat tolerant, you might try lantana. Now, there's another yellow flower that's similar size and shape that we all like to grow, and that's marigolds. But there are a few precautions you need to take if you're going to have success with them in the garden all summer long. If you've planted marigolds in your garden, you can anticipate vibrant orange and yellow colors all summer long, clear into fall. But to get them to that point, you're going to have to watch out for spider mites this summer. Now, spider mites are relatives of spiders. They're not true insects. They suck out plant foliage. They're very, very tiny, and you can hardly see them until the damage starts to occur. The first signs of spider mite infestation is a pinpoint, bronzy little spots all over the foliage, and then you might see some fine webbing later on. To prevent spider mites from getting started in marigolds, or at least to keep them at bay, if you'll give them a hard spray of water every day or every other day, that will prevent spider mites. Spider mites love hot, dry conditions. So with your marigolds, give them a shower every other day. That will help prevent them. If they get even worse, you might try using insecticidal soap about every third day, and that will help also. Again, to keep the marigolds blooming, make sure that you fertilize those along with your other annuals. Well, now I have an annual to show you that's a beautiful contrast with these bright yellow marigolds. As you can see, these blue ageratum are a great color contrast with the yellow marigolds. In fact, they're opposites on the color wheel. which tells us that they're really going to look good together in the garden. Now, Geranium is another plant that takes the heat real well but likes a lot of water. And although it's pretty low maintenance, it's a low-growing plant, doesn't need much pruning, you might occasionally want to deadhead it or take off some of the older blooms. Here's one that's just finishing being at its peak, and we'd like to cut it right here, take away the old growth, and allow for the new ones to come on. That'll keep the plants a little bit stronger. But if you have a large bed, you can just leave them for the summertime. Now, as a backdrop to these Geraniums and Marigolds, we have cannas coming up, same way in our other Marigold bed, so they'll give us a nice, tall, dark green backdrop. The flower colors are in reds, yellows, and oranges. Should look nice for the summer. Now, up ahead, towards the end of this bed, we have some plants that look a little bit warmer. With Geranium back here, it's blue, and it gives us the cooler tones in the garden, especially if you mix it with white or silver foliaged plants. But with warmer colors, such as these violet-colored petunias, you start getting a warmer feel in the garden, and you need to be a little careful about what you mix it with, because if you use too much purple and red and pink together, it can be too hot to the eye, especially in the heat of summer. But let's show you a part of our garden that is in the reds and the pinks and see what you think. To fill in between our newly planted Japanese hollies, we've planted some red begonias. The red and green looks good together. We will be mulching those begonias so we don't have any more mud splashing on them and to keep them cool during the summer. Begonias can be planted in either sun or shade, but if they're in the sun, they need extra mulch and plenty of moisture. As a transition, we've done a mixture of pink, white, and red petunias because right here we have some coral-colored roses and next to those some pinks. Now with the roses, it's absolutely imperative if you're going to keep them blooming all summer that you deadhead. In other words, prune off the old blossoms. But those give a wonderful fragrance for some potpourris. Right now I have some other aromatic plants to harvest and show you how to keep them throughout the year.